Orla, and I welcome the opportunity to participate in the debate. And indeed, I want to pay tribute to the staff, as I always do when I speak on this topic, because the Department of Social Welfare and Protection have really excelled in providing services. So I want to say that publicly. And I also welcome the points made in your speech that lie outside of the legislation, certainly the Christmas bonus, and in relation to the earnings disregard for disability allowance and the increase in the fuel allowance. Mind you, I'll be coming back to some of those in a minute, but I want to welcome some of the positive things that have happened, and the overall budget, which is 25.1 billion, but which includes 4 billion approximately in relation to pandemic payments. So I want to make a few general points and then maybe a few specific points. Without the Department of Social Welfare and Protection and without this budget, we would have a far more unequal society. That goes without a doubt. And those TDs that came into the Dáil today and talked about sesame economics fail to see that it's the public purse that's actually going some way to reduce the inequality gap, because the wages that are paid to workers, they're simply not sustainable. And so into that gap comes the public purse. And the worst thing that ever happened in my short time in the Dáil, is my 5th year in February, was the campaign led by the current Taoiseach when he was Minister for Social Protection in relation to fraud, because it gave a completely wrong image of the Department of Social Protection. And in fact, the percentage of fraud, as I understand it from my time on the public accounts, is minimal. The level of error is higher, and yet a completely wrong message went out, as opposed to a message going out, look what the state is doing in terms of payments, so that we can have a more equal society. So, Minister, if you were to do anything, I would ask you to run with a different image, and run with an image that's absolutely positive, and we cannot do without these payments. In relation to some of the comments about sesame economics and people, TDs on the left coming in not knowing what they're talking about, one has to understand that this budget is unprecedented, because, as my colleague Deputy Collins has said, the pandemic is unprecedented, and the pandemic came into a country that was ill-prepared on every level in terms of housing, an absolute housing crisis, with billions, well over $1 billion, going into the pockets of the landlords through public money and making the market unsustainable, in my opinion. The pandemic came into a country where the health system simply couldn't cope, and where decisions were made because of that led to people suffering, and certainly people over 65 and 70, certainly people in nursing homes and workers in meat factories and so on, because decisions were made on the basis of the inadequacy of our public services. And on top of that, we're looking at 680,000 people approximately living below the poverty line. That might be slightly down, and of those, 200,000 are under 18. That's in this republic, living below the poverty line. And then we have 100,000 at a minimum of working poor, and then we have the workers who are working part-time and just simply can't get full-time and are struggling. That is the background, and only a little pen picture of the background that I'm talking about when I talk about this social welfare budget. In relation to specific issues, I can't for the life of me understand how, on the one hand, first of all, let me welcome the U-turn in relation to pension age. It's very welcome. And it's now confirmed that that's not going to happen in relation to the increase from 67 to 68 and 66 to 67. I do hope you see sense and it goes back to 65. I wish and I hope that we will stop talking about people over 65 as a burden to the economy. They're certainly not a burden to the economy. They are contributors to the economy, and their skills can be used in so many ways, and we greatly need them in so many areas in our country, from teaching to helping out in different spheres. They are not a burden They are active contributors. And on the one hand, we look on them as a burden, and during COVID, we told them to stay behind closed doors, and yet those over 66 that were working, we utterly ignored. And we ignored in a very, very rude way, I think, Minister, I have to say. And the figure, the ESRI quarterly economic commentary in the summer told us an estimated 65,000 people above the age of 66 who reported, that's all, 65,000 people approximately above the age of 66 who reported being in some form of paid work in the final quarter of 19. Such workers are not entitled to make a claim for PUP, for job seekers or job seekers' benefit, and in most cases they've lost employment. Now, for the life of me, I cannot understand how that very restricted number of people have been excluded. I just can't understand it. Where at the same time we're talking about increasing the pension age. It simply doesn't make sense. In relation to the disability, the cost of disability, I welcome that there's, well, I don't welcome, but I acknowledge that there's a report, Indicon, that's looking at this. You might just confirm the cost of that report in looking at the cost of disability payment, something that we've all asked for. If we're seriously interested in bringing equality, that's the most basic payment that we could do. And Minister, you might address the cost of the report, when it will be published, and come back to me in relation to your own views. In relation to the carers allowance and the once-off payment that's not means tested, not taxed, I very much welcome that. But to say in your speech, perhaps this might capture, again, the contradictions in the government's approach to equality. You say Section 11 provides for an increase of 150 in the carers support grant, raising the payment to 1,850, and then you go on to say the highest level it has ever been set at. Now, you see, to celebrate that, one has to put it in context. And you're not putting any of it in context in relation to what carers do. And so they're to be grateful for the €150 extra, which is welcome, but without any context whatsoever. And the context is the carers are saving the state a fortune, day in, day out. And I think you believe that, and I think you accept that. Absolutely saving the carers a fortune. And again, 79%, this is Carers Ireland figures, 79% of those on carers allowance struggle to make ends meet. More than half, 52% of carers who participated in the State of Caring survey live in households with a total income of less than 30,000 per year. Almost 1 in 3, 29% of live in households with a total income of less than 20,000 a year, and so on. Now, they have to put up with reduced home help hours during the pandemic. Prior to that, they had to put up with hours that were given to them by the new computer approach. I forget what it's called, where there's an 1 hour to 2 hour assessment on a computer, and the computer tells the family how many hours are needed. Absolutely nothing to do with the level of dependence that the person needs. So in my area in Galway, without identifying the person, I just give you one example. Minding somebody who has all the symptoms of senile dementia at a young age in their 50s, and no respite, absolutely no respite whatsoever since the pandemic started. And of course, prior to the pandemic, respite was at a premium in any event. But during the pandemic, no respite. So when you're talking about carers and clapping yourselves on the back, and not you personally, Minister, but what you've said in your speech, it doesn't strike a musical chord with me, because I just see that person and that family as just one example of the thousands that are absolutely struggling on a daily basis, up all night, up early in the morning, trying to care for their loved one with absolutely no respite and limited hours. One or two other things that I would just like to highlight in my last couple of seconds is there's the core rates of social welfare were left unchanged. There's no movement at all to introducing a universal state pension. As I said already, no cost of disability payment. Domiciliary care allowance was not increased, and as was mentioned before, no steps taken to equalise job seeker rates for those between 18 and 24 and living at home. And absolutely no mention at all of those in direct provision, and maybe an increase in their allowance as recommended by Catherine Day. At the end of the day, Minister, we were to learn from COVID. We were to learn to have a transformative change in our lives, because we know we can't go back, either with climate change or with inequality. If we don't deal with inequality, we will never be able to face the next wave of whatever pandemic comes our way after this one.
Thank you very much, Deputy Connolly. Now, Minister, do you wish